Hello, my name is Guha, and today I'm going to be presenting about the United States military budget. Why is it an advantage rather than a setback? $800 billion. This is the current defense budget of the United States. The vast majority of nations around the globe cannot even fathom this amount of funds as part of their own GDP, forget their own defense budget. However, this hefty budget is justifiable in three ways in which I will go into more detail throughout the duration of my presentation. National security is one of the biggest points of concern to the US government, and it is imperative that our military and security agencies are ever ready to combat any potential threats to our nation, whether they're economic threats, political threats, diplomatic threats, or security threats. In the long run, military expenditure is beneficial to the United States from an economic, diplomatic, and security standpoint. While more expenditure and higher economic growth might seem counterintuitive, and it's an oxymoron, it is proven that there are existential benefits to high military investment. Military expenditure can increase the US economic growth in the long run as long as there is a certain balance to it. More investment in the military will increase US employment. Over here, we have the aggregate production function, which is a function of the output of a nation and the capital stock of a nation. The capital stock has three subcategories, which is technology, which is what we have here, human capital, which is your college education, your master's degree, and then the workforce, which is the total employment and the amount in the labor force. As you can see here, this graph has shifted up. When the graph shifts up, the level of technology that a country has goes up. The level of human capital, which means more people are getting a college education, more people are getting a master's degree, PhD, and advanced educations like that, goes up, and the employment as a result of that will go up. And when all those three factors are going up, the output of a country, which is the economic output of how much a country produces, which translates to the GDP, that will go up, which is a clear representation of the GDP rising. Connected to this, the US military provides 3.5 million jobs, which is the 20% of the public sector labor force. Also, the current unemployment rate is at 9.5%, but if that 3.5 million goes down due to a cut in military expenditure, this 20% will be a way smaller number, and this 9.5% will rise. To add on, the United States contributes 36% of total global military exports. In the GDP function, we have exports minus imports. When your exports function is greater than your import section, you have a trade surplus, and that contributes to growth in GDP, according to the GDP equation. To add on, private sector companies like defense contractors, automotive companies, artificial intelligence companies can invest in the military. And when they do invest in the military, according to the GDP equation, investment goes up, your GDP will also go up as well. Diplomatic affairs. The United States establishes diplomatic relations with other countries, and through a military standpoint, they can do this through joint military exercise and peacekeeping operations. Peacekeeping operations in especially volatile regions and joint military exercises contribute to international collaboration through the concept of military diplomacy. Military diplomacy encourages collaboration with other nations to understand one another militarily and diplomatically. The United States needs the funds to keep its military ready for these joint military exercises and peacekeeping operations through organizations like the United Nations and NATO to encourage participation with other nations in military operations and carry out their respective diplomatic missions. To add on, through the transfer of technology and defense equipment, other nations will also have the necessary means to defend themselves from any threats to their national security. This high military budget defines why the United States is the biggest exporter of defense equipment. Without this high military expenditure, the United States would not be able to fund for the production of its own military equipment, forget about exporting military equipment to international countries. The United States would be able to train international militaries in the proficiency of using their equipment so that they're prepared to face threats to their respective diplomatic missions. To add on, peace deals between warring factions through the United States as an intermediary force represents diplomatic intermediation and a show of strength. Examples of different peace deals include the Israel-Palestine deals of 1978, which was effectively named the Camp David Accords, and 2000 later, were mediated by Presidents Carter, as you can see here, and Clinton, respectively. To add on, the Sudanese peace agreement of 2005 between the Sudanese government and the Sudan People's Liberation Movement was mediated by the Bush administration, where former Secretary of State Colin Powell, as you can see here, signed the peace agreement, which resulted in the formation of South Sudan. This shows the ability of the United States as a peace intermediary and it shows how much power is required for the United States to do this. A great deal of military and diplomatic power, rather. And this will only come through that high military budget and why that military budget is justified. Combat preparedness is by far the most important justification to a high military budget. Military expenditure ensures military preparedness to defend against potential threats to national and global security. Investing in the military ensures that technology is state-of-the-art. The spirit of the soldier is very important, yes, that's true. But in modern-day warfare, technology is of utmost importance. Up-to-date technology will only come from an adequate defense budget that can fund this hardware in the first place. The defense budget is responsible solely for providing personnel with the means of surviving on the battlefield in order to carry out the diplomatic mission of the United States of America. As you can see here, this is meals ready to eat. Without a good defense budget, with an adequate defense budget, even basic needs like rations would not be able to provide it for. Forget advanced pieces of artillery, missile systems, and artificial intelligence. To add on, investing in the military will ensure that the United States will be ready for any future conflict. With global situations, namely the most prevalent one, the Russia-Ukraine war, the US has to be ready to immediately go to war if the war does spread to NATO. And if it does, the US as a core member is solely responsible for taking action and sending their military into action to protect their national interests. To add on, we have this political cartoon of the US and China with all their missiles, their naval forces, and their land forces and the Air Force. And it's snowing, as you can see here. This represents the new Cold War between the US and China. China is an especially pressing issue because they are with us in a standoff with us right now. And military expenditure will ensure that the US is ready to take on massive threats, given that there is no expected timeline of when that threat could arrive. In conclusion, military expenditure is important for economic growth, diplomatic affairs, and battle readiness. Defense expenditure will protect the nation's economic, political, diplomatic, and security interests. As Alexis de Tocqueville stated, it is how the government and the people use the freedom given to them. The freedom of determining the military expenditure is a right reserved to the US government and the US government alone. They are the sole decision makers of how much the US will be able to spend on their military depending on the political situations that are happening around the world. If the political situation is fairly good, then the US will not feel the need to increase the defense budget. But unfortunately, we live in a society where there is no stable political situation all over the globe. Right now, as we see in Russia and Ukraine, the US will be tempted to increase their military budget. They'll be obliged to increase their military budget and to protect their national interests if they are threatened. These are my sources. Thank you.